What if I told you that one of the most widely accepted truths in human history is actually wrong? Think about it for a second. Ask almost anyone, whether they're deeply religious or completely skeptical, what the name of the devil is, and you'll hear the same answers repeated with confidence. Satan or Lucifer. These names are everywhere, in movies, in books, in sermons, in conversations whispered in fear or curiosity. They feel ancient, powerful, almost unquestionable. But here's the uncomfortable question no one really asks. What if those aren't names at all? What if, for nearly 2,000 years, we've misunderstood something fundamental? Because when you stop relying on translations and go back to the original Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek manuscripts, the story begins to shift. And not just slightly, completely. The truth hidden in those ancient texts doesn't just tweak our understanding, it turns it upside down. And by the end of this video, you may never hear those words the same way again. To understand this, we need to go back, way back, to some of the oldest texts in the Bible. In the book of Job, there's a moment where a figure appears before God. In most English translations, it says, Satan came among them. Sounds like a name, right? But in the original Hebrew, that's not what it says. It says, Ha-Satan. That tiny word, ha, changes everything. Because ha simply means the, not a name, a title. The adversary. And in Hebrew grammar, this matters more than you might think. You don't put the in front of someone's personal name. You don't say the David or the Sarah. You say the king, the judge, the accuser. So what we're looking at here isn't a name. It's a function, an office, a role in a kind of cosmic courtroom. The figure in Job isn't introducing himself like, "Hi, I'm Satan." He's showing up as the adversary, the one whose job is to accuse, challenge, and oppose. And this isn't a one-time thing. The same structure appears again in the book of Zechariah. Same word, same meaning. But somewhere along the line, something subtle happened. Translators dropped the, capitalized the word. And suddenly, a title became a name in the minds of millions. Not because the text changed, but because the language did. And if this is already shifting how you see things, just wait, because what comes next is even more surprising. Before we go further, take 1 second to subscribe and turn on notifications. It helps the channel grow, and it means you won't miss the next deep dive like this one. Now, let's talk about Lucifer. If Satan isn't a name, then surely Lucifer must be, right? That's what most people assume. It sounds poetic, almost majestic, a fallen angel, a being of light brought down by pride. But here's where things take a sharp turn. The word Lucifer appears in Isaiah 14:12, and in English, it looks like a direct reference to a fallen being. But in the original Hebrew, that word doesn't exist. Instead, the text uses a phrase, Hillel ben Shachar, which simply means shining one, son of the dawn. Not a name, a metaphor, and not even about a supernatural being. The entire passage is actually a mocking poem aimed at the king of Babylon, a human ruler, a tyrant who thought he was untouchable, almost divine. The imagery compares him to the morning star, what we now know as the planet Venus. Bright for a moment, but quickly disappearing when the sun rises. It's sarcasm, a poetic way of saying, You thought you were everything, and now you're gone. So how did that become Lucifer? Centuries later, a scholar named Jerome translated the Bible into Latin. When he reached that verse, he used the word Lucifer, which simply meant light bringer, a common term for the morning star. At the time, it wasn't a name, just a description. But over the centuries, interpretations evolved. The metaphor became literal. The title became personal. And by the time English translations came along, Lucifer had been turned into a proper name, a name the original author never intended. You might expect the New Testament to clarify things, to give us the real name. But it does the exact opposite. Instead of naming the enemy, it uses more titles. Devil comes from the Greek word diabolos, meaning slanderer, someone who throws accusations. Again, not a name, a description. Even terms like Beelzebub, that's not a real name either. It's actually an insult, literally meaning something like Lord of the Flies. And in Revelation, the descriptions multiply. Dragon, serpent, deceiver. Each one paints a picture, but none of them give an identity. It's almost intentional. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what a name meant in the ancient world. A name wasn't just a label. It was identity, character, authority. To know someone's name was to know something about their essence. And to erase a name, that was one of the most severe judgments imaginable. It meant removing someone from memory itself, from history, from significance. So when the Bible carefully names angels like Michael and Gabriel, kings, prophets, even obscure individuals, but never gives the enemy a personal name, that silence starts to feel deliberate. Not like something is missing, but like something has been taken away. What if the absence of a name is actually part of the judgment? What if the figure so often portrayed as powerful has already been stripped of identity? Reduced not to a rival king, but to a role defined only by opposition. Because think about it. Every title points to failure. Adversary, accuser, deceiver, destroyer. Not creator, not ruler, not king. Just opposition. And that changes the perspective entirely. This isn't a story of two equal forces battling for dominance. It's a story of one ultimate authority, and one being defined only by resistance to it. And that's where everything comes into focus. Because while one figure is left unnamed, another is lifted above every name. In the New Testament, the name of Jesus is described as being above all others. Not just important, not just meaningful, but supreme. A name associated with authority, restoration, and victory. So the contrast couldn't be clearer. On one side, a nameless adversary defined by accusation. On the other, a name associated with purpose, identity, and power. And maybe that's the point. Not to make us fear what's in the shadows, but to understand what truly holds authority. So where does this leave us? It means that much of what we've assumed might come from tradition more than text. It means the enemy isn't presented as a named rival, but as a role of opposition. And it means that the focus of the story was never meant to be on him in the first place. Because the central message isn't about darkness gaining ground. It's about light already having authority. And maybe the most powerful takeaway is this. You don't need to know the name of something that's already been stripped of it. But understanding the name that remains, that's where everything changes. For centuries, words like Satan and Lucifer have shaped how people think about evil. But when you go back to the source, those words tell a very different story. Not of a named ruler of darkness, but of a figure defined only by opposition and absence. And whether you see this as theology, history, or linguistic evolution, one thing is certain. Sometimes the most powerful truths aren't found in what is said, but in what is left unsaid.